From Baruch Chait, one of my very favorite melodies, as Moshe Storch sung it in Hallel. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Thursday, Yom HaMishi. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Thursday? Steven in New Hampshire, Guy in Ohio, Gail in Kansas City, Paul in the Great Northwest, Bella in Florida, Belle in Texas, Melissa in Great Neck, Bill in mid-Missouri, Tom in PA, Renee in Indiana, Franco in Trieste, Italy, Frank in San Pedro, Ilanit in Silver Spring, Moishi in Brooklyn. I'm headed to Brooklyn. Chaim in Florida, Lester in Florida. Class tomorrow, Friday, as always. Class Saturday night, as always. Then I'm on a red eye for such a whirlwind trip. We won't have class on Sunday, but we will have it on Monday with God's help. So just a 24-hour trip to Brooklyn and New Jersey to attend the Kinnis HaShluchim, the great gathering, the annual gathering of Chabad rabbis from around the world. Very fortunate to be invited by some of my friends, my own Rav, and his brother, who's the Shliach in Belgravia and London. They're bringing me, I've been before, it's an incredible, incredible event, 6,000 Chabad rabbis. There's that famous picture that they take every year. That'll be in Crown Heights. So we're going to have breakfast in Crown Heights, lunch in New Jersey at the big gala, then stop at the Oihel where the Rebbe is buried near JFK Airport, and get back. I don't know much about sleeping during those 24 hours, but it should be a spiritual odyssey, and I'll just be missing one class on Sunday. But normal schedule tomorrow, Saturday, and then resume on Monday. We're not too far behind. We're 5 pages behind right now. I'm expecting a double tomorrow. Then we miss Sunday. So, we're holding about 5 pages behind. Another few weeks we should be caught up. Okay. Our daf today is page 55 here in Tractate Zevachim, the 29th volume of the Talmud, continuing our discussion, opening our discussion of Mishna number 4 here in chapter 5. Here we've been talking about the specific requirements of the offerings, the different types of offerings that were brought in the temple in descending order of sanctity. We started with the Yom Kippur offerings, then the sin offering and the burnt offering, and now we're going to talk about the communal peace offerings and the guilt offerings. Mishnah 4, these are the laws of the communal peace offerings and the guilt offerings. These are the guilt offerings. The guilt offering for robbery. This is brought by one from whom another demanded payment of a debt, and the one who actually owed it denied it and took a false oath. and then he was caught or admitted it, and he's going to bring the guilt offering. The guilt offering for unwitting misuse of consecrated property, right? That's me'ila, the prohibition on making personal use of consecrated property. If you do that, you bring a guilt offering. The guilt offering of an espoused maid servant. This is a very interesting law, very particular. The sages derive that this is about when slavery existed in the ancient world. A Canaanite slave who was co-owned by two masters, one freed her, and then she became betrothed to a Hebrew slave, a Hebrew manservant, and somebody, and then had conjugal relations with someone else. Because she's half slave and half free, it's not the normal case of what would be adultery or rape. There's a special offering that's brought in relationship with this legal scenario. It's a kind of legal conundrum. But at any rate, it's called the guilt offering of an espoused maidservant. The guilt offering of a Nazir, a person who took a vow of Naziris, to abstain from the products of the grapevine, not to become impure for the dead, and not to cut his hair. But during that period of Naziris, he came into contact with the dead. So he's going to have to restart his count of days and bring this guilt offering of the Nazir. The guilt offering of a Mitzora, one who had this condition, the skin condition Saras, it cleared up. Now it's associated, it's a spiritual malady with a physical expression. Now he's going to go through a purification process that includes a guilt offering. And the provisional guilt offering, which is the one we normally think about, the Asham Talui, which is brought by one who is uncertain as to whether he committed a sin that if he knew he did it would require a sin offering. Concerning all of these, their slaughter is in the north of the temple courtyard, and the collection of their blood in a service vessel is in the north. And their blood requires two placements on the corners of the altar that are four, right? Like the offering that we talked about yesterday, the burnt offering. And the meat portions of the offering are eaten within the curtains, i.e., in the temple courtyard by male priests. Like the sin offering, this is not flesh of that offering is eaten by its owner, only by the priests. And that meat from the guilt offering that's eaten by the priests is prepared in any manner of food preparation, and it's eaten on the day that the offering was sacrificed and during the night that follows until midnight. That's Mishnah 4. Now we're on page 55a. From where do we derive that the communal peace offerings, i.e. the two sheep brought on Shavuos, require slaughter in the north of the temple courtyard? And the Gemara answers, as Rabba bar Rav Hanan taught before Rava. The passage in the Torah discussing the offerings of Shavuos, right? Shavuos, the summer festival that comes in between Passover in the spring and Sukkot in the fall. The passage of Torah discussing the offerings of Shavuos states, and you shall offer one he-goat for a male goat for a sin offering, and two male sheep in their first year for a sacrifice of peace offerings. That's Leviticus 23:19. So the peace offerings are juxtaposed with the sin offering. Therefore, just as the sin offering must be slaughtered in the north of the temple courtyard, so too the communal peace offerings must be slaughtered in the north of the temple courtyard. Right? We're learning out this aspect of the law. Where in the courtyard is it slaughtered? The Torah is silent on that, but through a juxtaposition to something we've already learned, that the sin offering is slaughtered in the north, we're going to extend that teaching to the communal peace offerings. Rava said to him, but from where is the requirement to slaughter a sin offering in the north of the temple courtyard derived? It is derived from its juxtaposition with a burnt offering. As the verse states, speak to Aaron and to his son, saying, this is the law of the sin offering. In the place where the burnt offering is slaughtered, shall the sin offering be slaughtered before the Lord. It is most holy. Leviticus 6:18. So, are the alarm bells going off? Didn't we learn this? Are we saying that we just learned that the place of the sin offering is in the north of the courtyard through its juxtaposition with the law of the burnt offering? And now we're saying that the law of the guilt offering, that it has to be slaughtered in the north, is learned out from the sin offering through juxtaposition between the guilt offering and the sin offering? Didn't we say that a law learned by a juxtaposition cannot be turned around and taught to another law through a second juxtaposition? Didn't we have that principle? And indeed, in the realm of consecrated matters, can a matter derived via a juxtaposition then teach its halacha, its law, via a juxtaposition? But the Gemara on page 49b, right, 6 days ago, demonstrated that it cannot. So Rava explains, rather, the source that communal peace offerings must be slaughtered in the north of the temple courtyard is not derived by a juxtaposition from a law that was already derived via a juxtaposition. Rather, it is derived from that which Rav Mari, the son of Rav Kahana, teaches. And the verse states, also in the day of your gladness and in your appointed seasons and in your new moons you shall blow with the trumpets over your burnt offerings and over your peace offerings, and they shall be to you for a memorial before God. I am the Lord your God. This verse directly juxtaposes burnt offerings with communal peace offerings. Just as burnt offerings are offerings of the most sacred order, so too communal peace offerings are offerings of the most sacred order. Furthermore, just as a burnt offering must be slaughtered in the north of the temple courtyard, so too communal peace offerings must be slaughtered in the north of the temple courtyard. We're going to make a distinction, and we're definitely going to make it today, between Kadshei Kadashim, offerings of the highest sanctity, right, of the holiest order, and Kadashim Kalim, offerings of lesser sanctity. So what we're saying here is, okay, well, it seems like if it's an offering of the highest level of sanctity, right, that upper tier of the highest sanctity of offerings, the Yom Kippur offerings, the sin offering, the burnt offering, and the guilt offering, maybe for that reason, they're all slaughtered in the north. Then when we get to offerings of lesser sanctity, they don't have to be slaughtered in the north. But let's see. The Gemara asks, rather, what law does the first juxtaposition between communal... so the Gemara asks, well, rather, what law does the first juxtaposition between communal peace offerings and the he-goat sin offering come to teach? So the Gemara answers, it teaches that the laws of communal peace offerings are like the laws of a sin offering. So just as a sin offering is eaten only by male priests, so too communal peace offerings are eaten only by male priests. Male priests? Are you saying there are female priests? No. Why male priests? It means that the priests and their sons, right, who are aspiring priests, so to speak, they're going to become priests when they get older, they can eat it, but not their wives, their daughters, etc., right? They have to actually be Kohanim, not just wives of Kohanim, not family of Kohanim, not slaves of Kohanim. They can eat other foods that only Kohanim can eat, like teruma, but in terms of this, the meat of a guilt offering or sin offering, only the Kohanim, the priests themselves. Abaye said to Rava, if so, then with regard to the ram of a Nazir, concerning which it is written in the verse, and he shall present his offering to the Lord, one he-lamb in its first year, without blemish for a burnt offering, and one she-lamb in its first year, without blemish for a sin offering, and one ram without blemish for a peace offering. Right? These are the offerings a Nazir brings at the completion of his Naziris. So too shall we say that the Torah juxtaposed the ram of the Nazir with a sin offering of a Nazir to teach that just as a sin offering is eaten only by male priests, so too the ram of a Nazir is eaten only by male priests. As the next Mishna states, the ram of a Nazir may be eaten by every ritually pure Jew. It is not limited, like the meat of a sin offering, to priests alone. So Rava answers, how can these cases be compared? There, with regard to the ram of a Nazir, since it is written, and the priest shall take the foreleg of the ram when it is cooked, that's number 619. And by inference, one can deduce that the owner may eat all of the remaining portions of the animal, right? There's a specific portion of the offering of the animal that is set aside for the priest. Therefore, the rest of it is set aside for its owner. The Gemara asks, well, if so, in any event, the cooked foreleg of the ram of the Nazir should be eaten only by male priests. So the Mishna states that the cooked foreleg may be eaten by priests, their wives, and their slaves. So the Gemara concedes this is indeed difficult. Based on its juxtaposition with the sin offering of a Nazir, the law should be that only the male priests may eat it, and yet that is not the case. The limits of juxtaposition. So the Gemara offers a different explanation. And if you wish, say that the foreleg of the ram of the Nazir is called sacred, but it is not called an offering of the most sacred order. Therefore, it cannot be juxtaposed with the sin offering of a Nazir in this regard. The Gemara asks, but rather with regard to what law is the ram of the Nazir juxtaposed with the sin offering of the Nazir? And Rava says it is juxtaposed to teach that if the Nazir shaved after the sacrifice of any one of the three offerings, he has fulfilled his obligation after the fact. Right? He can't shave his head, he can't cut his hair while he is a Nazir. He is a Nazir until he finishes the process of bringing those offerings at the end. But if he jumps the gun a little bit and cuts his hair early, as long as he brought one of those offerings after the fact, it's okay. We say after the fact because he shouldn't have done it. The proper way was to wait till all the offerings are brought. But if at least one of the offerings was brought, what he did then by shaving prematurely is not so bad that he has to repeat his Naziris. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 4 here in chapter 5. Mishnah 5. The thanks offering and the ram of the Nazir are offerings of lesser sanctity. Now we've dropped down a level from the offerings of the highest sanctity, the greatest sanctity, to this next tier. And the first two that we're learning about are the thanks offering, the Todah, and the ram of the Nazir. Okay? There are offerings of lesser sanctity. Their slaughter is anywhere in the temple courtyard, not necessarily in the north. And their blood requires 2 placements that are for when they're sprinkled on the altar. And they are eaten throughout the city of Jerusalem by every person, i.e. any Jew who is tahor. You can't be tameh when you're eating the meat of offerings. It may be prepared in any manner of food preparation on the day the offering was sacrificed and during the night that follows until midnight. The status of the portion that is separated from them and given to the priests is similar to theirs, but the portion that is separated is eaten by the priests, by their wives, and by their children, and by their slaves, unlike the meat portions of offerings that are given to the Kohanim from sin offerings, which only they can eat, not their families and slaves. That's Mishnah 5. The sages taught in a Baraisa, the verse states with regard to the priests, and the breast of waving and the thigh of heaving you shall eat in a pure place, you and your sons and your daughters with you, for they are given as your due, and your sons due, D-U-E, out of the peace offerings of the children of Israel. Leviticus 10:14, explaining, right, this is some of the gifts that the Kohanim receive because they are doing the work of the service of the Lord, serving in the temple. And they do not, like all the Leviim, right, the Levites, receive a portion of land in the Holy Land like all the other Jews or the other tribes do. That's why they receive these tithes and these gifts. Rabbi Nehemiah said, but did they eat the first offerings mentioned in the previous 2 verses in a place of impurity? The previous verses make reference to the remainder of the meal offering, these previous verses when this occurs in the Torah, which also had to be eaten in a pure place. So rather, by inference, the word pure in this context is referring to a place that is to some degree ritually pure, that is to some degree ritually impure, but in other respects, it is pure, right? So there's some kind of a mixture of impure and pure with respect to the place where these offerings are eaten. So what is this? The priest must eat in a place that is pure due to the impurity of a metzora, but it may be a place that is impure due to the impurity of a man who experiences a gonorrhea-like discharge, a zav. And which place is this? This is the Israelites' camp. Okay, so when we talk about the camp in the wilderness, when the children of Israel came out of Egypt, went to Mount Sinai, received the Torah, and then ended up wandering for 40 years, there was a very organized array of how the children of Israel were arranged, right? So there were the tribes, the 12 tribes, kind of like the outer area, huge area. We're talking about millions of people out there in the desert. If you've ever seen photos from Burning Man, just this vast encampment, and that's only thousands of people. These are millions of people, so it's a vast encampment. And so, within the encampment, you're in the camp of the Israelites. When you get closer to the center, that's where the camp of the Levites was. And in the middle of the camp of the Levites stood the tabernacle, right? The Mishkan. So that sort of concentric circles, camp of the Israelites, camp of the Levites, and the camp of the Holy, right? The actual tabernacle, that would be sort of translated in later centuries when the temple was built in Jerusalem to, what would it be? Let's see how it's laid out here. This is the Israelite camp in the wilderness, and once the temple was built in Jerusalem, it refers to the entire city of Jerusalem, right? So the equivalent of the camp of the Israelites, as opposed to the rest of the world, is Jerusalem. Then within Jerusalem, the place that is equivalent to the Levite camp, that's the Temple Mount. And then the place of the tabernacle itself, obviously that is the temple, right? The temple within the Temple Mount. Okay, so a Zav, so what are we talking about? Why would we say that the Israelite camp is a place of mixed purity and impurity? Well, a Zav, a person who's had this discharge, could remain in the Israelite camp, but a Mitzorah could not, right? One who has tsaras had to remove himself from the Israelite camp. He was quarantined outside the camp until his skin cleared up. Then he went through the purification process, and then he could come back into the Israelite camp. And this is the source for the law in the Mishna that these offerings may be eaten anywhere in Jerusalem, right? That the thanks offering and the ram of the Nazir could be eaten anywhere in Jerusalem, but not outside of Jerusalem. The Gemara asks, but why not say that the word pure, tahor, is referring to a place which is pure from the impurity of a zav and impure due to the ritual impurity imparted by a corpse? Why are we going to talk about, the difference in purity levels between the Mitzorah and the Zav? Why don't we compare instead between the Zav and somebody who came into contact with a corpse? And which place is this? This is the Levites' camp in the wilderness. And once the temple was built in Jerusalem, the Temple Mount, right? So a person who has corpse tuma cannot enter the Temple Mount until he goes through a very serious purification, 7-day purification. So why can't we use that kind of comparison? So Abaye says that, whereas a Zav could be in the Israelite camp, he can't enter the Temple Mount. The one with corpse tuma, what am I trying to say here? I'm not sure what I'm trying to say. Let me just keep reading here. Abaye says that the verse states with regard to the meal offering, and you shall eat it in a sacred place. The word it is a restriction, teaching that one must eat it, the meal offering, in a sacred place. This is the camp of the divine presence. But one is not required to eat another offering, i.e. the breast of the waving and the thigh of heaving, in a sacred place. So this removes the portions from the camp of the divine presence, the temple itself, to be eaten in the Levites' camp, right? That would be the equivalent of the Temple Mount. Then it is written, you shall eat in a pure place, which removes the portions from the Levites' camp to be eaten in the Israelites' camp, which later is equivalent to Jerusalem. So Rava says a different explanation. It, i.e. the meal offering, must be eaten in a sacred place, but one is not required to eat another offering, i.e. the breast of waving and the thigh of heaving, in a sacred place. This verse removes the portions completely from any pure place, and according to this stage of Rava's interpretation, these portions may be eaten anywhere.
But then the merciful one wrote, you shall eat in a pure place, which brings it into the Israelite camp, which is a pure place relative to everywhere outside it. So the Gemara asks, but why not say that the verse brings it into the Levites' camp, which is also referred to as pure? And the Gemara answers, we bring it into one camp adjacent to the area outside the encampment of the Jewish people, but we do not bring it into two camps, right? Ascending holiness, and we're going to make comparison between the rest of the world and Jerusalem, between Jerusalem and the Temple Mount, between the Temple Mount and the temple itself, but we're not going to skip, from two levels of holiness. And so now the Gemara asks, well, if so, also with regard to removing it, why not say that we remove it to one place, but we do not remove it from two places? So accordingly, the initial derivation should be to eat it in the Israelites' camp. And furthermore, it is written, you may not eat within your gates the tithe of your grain or of your wine or your oil or the firstborn of your herd of your flock, nor of any of your vows which you vow, nor your gift offerings, nor the offering of your hand, in Deuteronomy 12:17. And this verse negates the possibility that an offering may be eaten in your gates, meaning at home rather than in Jerusalem. So rather, it is clear that the source for the ruling of the Baraisa is in accordance with the explanation of Abaye, and that is why the meat of peace offerings, thanks offerings, which are a type of peace offering. So the meat of a thanks offering and the ram of the Nazir can be eaten in Jerusalem, but not outside Jerusalem. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah 5. Now we open Mishnah 6. Peace offerings. All right? So the thanks offering is a type of peace offering. And as we've learned before, that the Pesach, right, the Passover offering, if you don't eat it on Pesach, if you don't slaughter that animal that you designated to be a Pesach on Passover, and you slaughter it any other day of the year, then it automatically becomes a peace offering, right? So a peace offering, this is a voluntary offering that people could bring. It would be slaughtered in the temple, its blood would be sprinkled on the altar, and then the owners would eat it. And it was a way of celebrating and giving thanks to God. The thanks offering is a little bit more particularized. It has a few more requirements in that it is accompanied by all kinds of loaves of bread. But the peace offering is a kind of simpler way to show your appreciation and love of God and celebrate and rejoice in all that the Lord has done, all the good that the Lord has done for us, right? So peace offerings are offerings of lesser sanctity. Their slaughter is anywhere in the temple courtyard, and their blood requires two placements that are four, and they are eaten throughout the city of Jerusalem by every person, meaning any ritually pure Jew. They are prepared in any manner of food preparations. They're eaten for 2 days and 1 night, i.e. the day on which they're slaughtered, the following day, and the intervening night. The status of the portion that is separated from them and given to the priests is similar to theirs, but the portion that is separated is eaten by the priests, by their wives, and by their children, and by their slaves. So very similar to the thanks offering. That's Mishnah 6. Now the Gemara. The sages taught in a Baraisa with regard to peace offerings from the cattle. Right, so a peace offering could be brought from a kosher animal, generally speaking, sheep, goat, that's from the flock, or cow, that's from the herd. So they taught in a Baraisa that with regard to cattle peace offerings, the verse states, and he shall lay his hand upon the head of his offering, laying hands on it, that's called semicha, and slaughter it at the entrance of the tent of meeting, Leviticus 3:2. Now, with regard to sheep peace offerings, the verse states, and he shall lay his hand upon the head of his offering and slaughter it before the tent of meeting. That's Leviticus 3:8. And with regard to goat peace offerings, the verse states, and he shall lay his hand upon the head of it and slaughter it before the tent of meeting. So the first for the cattle was at the entrance of, and then for the sheep and goats, it says before the tent of meeting. So the repetition serves to render fit all directions of the temple courtyard for the slaughter of offerings of lesser sanctity. From here, one can derive a kal v'chomer inference to permit slaughter in the north of the temple courtyard, right? The sin offering had to be slaughtered in the north. These don't. So the question is, can you slaughter them in the north if you want to? They're saying yes. Just as the rites of slaughtering offerings of the most sacred order, which are not rendered fit in all directions, are rendered fit, to proceed with the offering if you slaughter them in the north. Then, with regard to the rites of slaughtering offerings of lesser sanctity, which are rendered fit in all directions, right, meaning they can be slaughtered anywhere in the temple courtyard, is it not logical that they would also be rendered fit to proceed with the offering process if they're slaughtered in the north? And Rabbi Eliezer says the repetition of the verse is stated only to render it fit, slaughter in the north, right? In other words, he's agreeing with this saying that's exactly why it's stated, why it's repeated this way, as one might have thought. And could this not be derived through logical inference? Just as with regard to offerings of lesser sanctity, whose slaughter is rendered fit in any direction, nevertheless their place is not rendered fit for slaughter of offerings of the most sacred order. Then, with regard to offerings of the most sacred order, whose slaughter is rendered fit only in the north, is it not logical that their place should not be rendered fit for the slaughter of offerings of lesser sanctity? Right? In other words, you might have thought, since it's the north is the place where that is only in the north that offerings of the most sacred order can be slaughtered, then maybe there's something special about the north where offerings of lesser sanctity cannot come. Meaning, it was repeated like this to tell you that they can't be slaughtered in the north. You might have thought this. Therefore, says Rabbi Eliezer, the verse states, tent of meeting, 3 times, to teach that offerings of lesser sanctity may be slaughtered in the north. Now we're on page 55b. And the Gemara clarifies with regard to what do they disagree, right? They both just said, Rabbi Eliezer and the sages, the majority before him, both said you can slaughter offerings of lesser sanctity in the north. So what is it that they're disagreeing about? So the first Tana holds that 3 verses are written. 1 verse serves to teach the law itself, that we require that the slaughter take place at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And the next verse serves to render fit slaughter at the sides, i.e. the entire length of the temple courtyard eastward from the entrance, and not only that part which is directly in front of the entrance. And the third repetition of the verse of this phrase the repetition of this verse in the third verse, the repetition of this phrase in the third verse serves to disqualify the sides of the sides, i.e. those parts of the courtyard that are not in front of the entrance at all. And it was necessary to have a verse teach the fitness of the slaughtering in the north, as it can be derived via a kal v'chomer inference. That's what the first Tana teaches. And Rabbi Eliezer holds that 1 verse is necessary to teach the law itself, that requires slaughter at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And the next verse serves to render fit the slaughter in the north of the courtyard. And the third verse comes to render fit slaughter at the sides of the courtyard. But according to him, it was not necessary to have a verse teach that the sides of the sides are not fit for the slaughter of the offering. We could have derived that logically. Next topic. The Gemara asks, what is different here that it is written at the entrance to the tent of meeting in Leviticus 3:2, and what is different there that it is written before the tent of meeting in Leviticus 3:8 and 3:13? Right? The second 2 repetitions have a slightly different formulation. The first one says that this is slaughtered at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and then the other 2 say before the tent of meeting. So the Gemara answers, this teaches us a matter in accordance with that which Rav Yehuda says, that Shmuel says. As Rav Yehuda says, that Shmuel says, peace offerings that one slaughtered in the temple before the doors of the sanctuary were open. Right, let's do it again. Peace offerings that one slaughtered in the temple before the doors of the sanctuary were opened are disqualified. As it is stated with regard to peace offerings, and he shall slaughter it at the entrance to the tent of meeting, which teaches that it must be slaughtered when the entrance is open and serves as an actual entrance, and not when it is locked. As long as the entrance to the tent of meeting, or in the days of the temple, when the doors to the sanctuary are closed, one may not sacrifice the peace offerings, and if they are sacrificed, they are disqualified, right? So we're learning that the huge doors of the temple Here, right, when these doors are closed, which they are at night, then in the morning, you can't bring a peace offering and slaughter it here in the courtyard before those doors are open. And if you did, that peace offering is disqualified. You have to wait till the doors are open. It was also stated that Mar Ukva Bar Chama says that Rabbi Yosei, the son of Rabbi Hanina, says, peace offerings that one slaughtered before the doors of the sanctuary were opened are disqualified. As it is stated in the verse, he shall slaughter it at the entrance to the tent of meeting, and this means when the entrance of the sanctuary is open and not when it is locked. In the West, right, whenever we say in the West in the Talmud, so we're drawing a distinction between the sages in the land of Israel, that's the West, relative to the sages learning and teaching in Bavel, in Babylonia, which was by then part of the Persian Empire, and we are learning Talmud Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud, because that community was safer and able to learn and teach in peace as compared to the sages laboring under the Roman persecution in the West, right? So that's why the Jerusalem Talmud is incomplete. It was never finished. That's why we learned Daf Yomi out of Talmud Bavli. But there were, and over the course of time, because, they didn't have telephones and Zoom meetings and everything that we have, there was some separation between the communities in terms of certain customs and teachings that were a little bit different in the West versus in the East. So in the West, in Eretz Yisrael, they teach this law like this. Rav Yaakov Bar Acha says that Rav Ashi says, peace offerings that one slaughtered before the door of the sanctuary were opened are disqualified. And in the tabernacle, which had no doors, right, in the wilderness, now we're talking about 1,000 years earlier, and in the tabernacle which had no doors, peace offerings that were slaughtered before the Levites erected the tabernacle or after the Levites dismantled the tabernacle were also disqualified. Now the Gemara comments, it is obvious that if the door is closed but not locked, it has the same status as if it were locked. And the Gemara asks, if there is a curtain covering the entrance, what is the law? So Rabbi Zera says a curtain itself is made only to be used like an open entrance, and therefore it is not considered as if the entrance is closed, right? Isn't that interesting? If you have a doorway, right, if the door is closed, it's closed. If the door is open, it's open. Some people will hang like a beaded curtain in a doorway. So, sometimes you can see through that, sometimes you can't, but it's obviously something you can just pass through easily. Is that considered a closed doorway or not? Now you got the answer. No, it's not. A door closes it, a curtain doesn't. The Gemara asks, what is the law if a tall item is blocking the entrance? And the Gemara suggests, come and hear a proof that a tall item does not render an entrance as closed. As it is taught in a Baraisa, Rabbi Yosei, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, says, there were two wickets. By wickets, this is the way we're translating a different word for openings. In the chamber of knives. Chamber of knives. So if you're looking overhead view, looking down on the temple, right? So this is the courtyard here. This is the altar where the offerings, where the altar pyre was and things are burned. This is the ramp up to it. This is the north of the courtyard, where slaughterings that had to be done in the north were done. This inside here, inside this tall building, that's the sanctuary. And you notice that the front of the sanctuary is wider than the rest of the sanctuary. So these protrusions here and here were actually large enough to be little rooms down here, where they could go in this entrance and make a right or a left. And there were little rooms in these protrusions on either side of the entrance to the sanctuary, and these rooms down in here that they could enter, that the priest could go into, those are both called the chamber of knives. So they're the chambers of knives, two of them. What about the chambers of knives? Let's see, where am I?
Yes, so there were 2 openings in the chamber of knives, and their height was 8 cubits. So the function of these openings was in order to render fit the entire temple courtyard for the eating of offerings of the most sacred order, and to render fit all of the temple courtyard for the slaughter of offerings of lesser sanctity. Due to the openings, the western area of the courtyard was considered to be before the tent of meeting. Okay, so what they're saying here is in the chamber of knives, which was down here, and we don't see it in this model, but it seems like there were slight openings here and here, so that you could say that this entire courtyard could be considered to be before the entrance, right? Because it's wider here and there's little openings there in the wall, it's like you have an opening to the sanctuary from anywhere in the courtyard. Therefore, if the requirement is to be before the entrance, right, or in front, or at the entrance, or before the tent of meeting, or at the entrance of the tent of meeting, then anywhere in the courtyard will have that status because of those openings in the chamber of knives. Right, and so you could close enough. Okay. The Gemara explains this inference. And what? Is the reference to the 8 cubits not referring to the fact that in front of the wickets there was an obstruction 8 cubits high, and nevertheless the area outside of it is considered open to the chamber of knives? And the Gemara answers no, their height was 8 cubits, i.e. the wickets themselves were 8 cubits high. So the Gemara raised an objection to this explanation from a Mishna in Tractate Midos, page 35a, which teaches all the gates that were there in the temple were 20 cubits high and 10 cubits wide. If so, how could these wickets be only 8 cubits high? And the Gemara answers, the wickets are different as they are not considered gates. They're just some kind of partition. So the Gemara questions the ruling of the Baraisa. How did the wickets render fit the entire temple courtyard? But there are the sides, i.e. the north and south of the chamber of knives, and the wickets faced only to the west. So, okay, so if we're talking about the west, that's kind of interesting, right? So the west means this way. East is that way. Right, so that's interesting. So I think I misunderstood. What they're talking about is there were some openings in the back of the chamber of knives back here to render this area behind it also available. Right, and so you can actually see that, I think, in this illustration here. Right? There's openings. You see the chamber of knives at the bottom, those wide parts at the entrance to the sanctuary. And there are little openings that extend backwards along the sides of the sanctuary. So it's that part, right, to the west of the entrance that has also been rendered part of the courtyard where this slaughtering could be done, and I guess this meat could be eaten. So let's see. Right, so the Gemara raises an objection. So the Gemara, but there are the sides, i.e. to the north and south of the chamber of knives, and the wickets faced only to the west, those openings. So the Gemara answers that they inserted the wickets in the corner of the chamber, so that one opened to the northwest and another to the northeast. You can actually see that. I don't know if the resolution of this camera will show it to you. But there's little openings in the corner, right? Sort of toward the top of the page. Those corners have little openings, and that's these wickets that allow you to be deemed, anywhere around the sanctuary, still in the courtyard where these peace offerings could be handled and consumed. Where'd I go? Now the Gemara asks, what is the law with regard to the area behind the hall of the ark cover? Okay, so now we're talking about, right, so this is the sanctuary, or this is the holy temple in the inside of it, right? The front here is, right, the front here, from here to here, is the sanctuary. And then if you could look down on it from the back to the, from the middle to the back, or the back area, this is the Holy of Holies. Right down below it is the Holy of Holies. And so that's where the ark would sit, right, in the first temple, Solomon's temple, and then later the ark was hidden away, but it was still the Holy of Holies where the high priest would enter on Yom Kippur back here. So what they're asking is, what about the part of the courtyard that is back here, right, back here, behind the Holy of Holies? There's some area of the courtyard down in here. What about, it's a little bit narrow in this model, but there's enough space there in the actual, there was an area there. What about that? Is that considered the courtyard where slaughter of peace offerings could happen? Come in here. As Rami bar Rav Yehuda says, that Rav says there was a small niche behind the hall of the ark cover, which was 8 cubits high. And the function of this niche was in order to render fit the entire temple courtyard for the eating of offerings of the most sacred order, and to render fit all of the temple courtyard for the slaughter of offerings of lesser sanctity, right? So anything that had to be eaten in the temple courtyard could be eaten anywhere around the temple, and anything that could be slaughtered anywhere in the temple courtyard could be slaughtered anywhere around the temple in that courtyard, thanks to these little openings to the temple, which act as the entrance, right, to the tent of meeting, or the entrance to the holy temple. And this is as it is written, for the precinct westward, 4 at the causeway and 2 at the precinct, in 1 Chronicles 26:18. And what is the meaning of the term for the precinct? Laparbar, Rav Shela said it is like one who says facing outward, kelape bar, kind of pun. New topic. Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says one is liable for entering the temple courtyard in a state of ritual impurity, tuma, only with regard to an area whose length is 187 cubits by 135 cubits in width. Right, so there's a place where you can't come if you're tameh. What place is that? The temple courtyard of this measurement, 187 by 135. Sounds very specific. How is he going to show that? Now we're on page 56a. Getting a little start on tomorrow. Atana taught a baraisa before Rav Nachman. The entire temple courtyard was 187 cubits in length by 135 cubits in width. Rav Nachman said to the Tana, my father said this to me. In an area such as this, the priests enter there and eat offerings of the most sacred order there, and the slaughter of offerings of lesser sanctity is done there, and they are liable due to entering in the state of tuma. Right? So that is what we define as a temple courtyard. Its legal requirements are that slaughter which is done anywhere in that temple courtyard, that would be offerings of lesser sanctity, or offerings of the highest sanctity whose portions are eaten by the priest can be done anywhere in that courtyard. And anyone who enters that courtyard while tameh is liable for entering the temple courtyard while tameh. What is the line? What is the demarcation for that? This, what we're calling the courtyard of a 187 by 135 cubits. And the Gemara asks, these specific dimensions serve to exclude what? Why do we need to know this number? What is it telling us? If we say that they are stated to exclude the windows, doors, and thickness of the wall, we learn the opposite in a Mishna in Tractate Pesachim 83b. Can't read that. The windows in the wall and the thickness of the wall are considered as though they are inside the temple courtyard. Right? So how far does that temple courtyard extend? Into the walls that it runs into, or just at the edge of the wall? Rather, they are stated to exclude the chambers in the temple courtyard. And the Gemara asks, and if it is referring to chambers that are built in the non-sacred area, which is outside this designated space, and open to the sacred area, but didn't we learn in a Mishnah in Tractate Meiser Sheni 3:8 that the inside of chambers that are built in the sacred area but are open to the non-sacred area are non-sacred, but their roofs are sacred. And if they are built in a non-sacred area and open to the sacred area, their interior is sacred and their roofs are non-sacred. So the Gemara answers, they have sanctity by rabbinic law. We don't have to get too much in the weeds here, but you can see in the overhead model where we have the whole courtyard. It's surrounded by this area We have walls around the outside, and there are rooms and chambers all along these walls, and there are rooms and chambers inside this area and around here, right? And so the question is, these chambers, are they considered part of the sacred courtyard or not, right? And that's what they're arguing about now. The Gemara asks, and do those chambers not have sanctity by Torah law? But isn't it taught in a baraisa with regard to the chambers that are built in the non-sacred area of the Temple Mount and open into the sacred area? From where is it derived that the priests enter there and eat their offerings of the most sacred order and the remainders of meal offerings, right? That they eat them not in the courtyard, but in this chamber of hybrid sanctity, which seems to be lesser sanctity, but maybe still some, because it opens into the sacred courtyard. So the verse states, with regard to a meal offering, it shall be eaten without leaven in a holy place. In the courtyard of the tent of meeting, they shall eat it. Leviticus 6:9. So the verse could have simply stated in a holy place, which indicates the courtyard. By also stating in the courtyard of the tent of meeting, the Torah amplified many courtyards with one type of eating, i.e. of the meal offering. So if the chambers do not have sanctity by Torah law, the sages would not have permitted the priest to eat offerings of the most sacred order there. So Rava said the law concerning eating is different. The Torah specifically includes these chambers in addition to the temple courtyard itself for eating offerings of the most sacred order. By contrast, with regard to slaughtering offerings of lesser sanctity and the punishment for entering the courtyard while tameh, these chambers are not considered sacred by Torah law. That's why I said a kind of hybrid with respect to sanctity. So the Gemara asks, but with regard to tuma, ritual impurity, is one not liable to receive kares for entering these chambers? If you enter the Temple Mount, right, while tameh, you do it intentionally, you can receive kares for that. Or certainly if you enter the Holy Temple, the courtyard of the Holy Temple. So now that we're saying that these areas have hybrid sanctity, well, if you enter those rooms intentionally while tameh, are you subject to kares or not? But isn't it taught in a baraisa with regard to the chambers that are built in the non-sacred area and that open to the sacred area? Priests enter there and eat offerings of the most sacred order there, but they may not slaughter offerings of a lesser sanctity there, and they are liable to receive kares if they enter there while tameh. So Rava could answer, did you not say in the baraisa that they may not slaughter offerings of lesser sanctity in those chambers? If so, amend the text of the baraisa and teach also that they are not liable to receive kares for entering in a state of tuma. If you can't slaughter offerings of lesser sanctity there, that means where can we slaughter offerings of lesser sanctity? Anywhere in the courtyard. So anywhere in the courtyard means that's the courtyard. So if you can slaughter offerings of lesser sanctity, then you're in the courtyard. And if you go there while tameh intentionally, you are liable to kares. And if you're not liable to kares, then you should also not be able to slaughter offerings of lesser sanctity there. So the Gemara challenges this and says, granted, the priest may not slaughter there because slaughtering an offering requires that it be performed before the entrance of the temple courtyard. And if he slaughters it inside a chamber, he is not before the entrance. But why would they not be liable for entering there in a state of tuma? I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. And the Gemara answers, and according to your reasoning, when it teaches that they may not slaughter there, are we not dealing even with a case in which there is an act of slaughter performed before the entrance, i.e. the entrance to the chamber that directly faced the entrance of the temple? As, if not, then for what purpose was it necessary to teach this at all? So rather, even though he slaughters the offering before the entrance, the baraisa teaches that a priest may not slaughter offerings in the chambers because that area is not sacred. It's still considered before the entrance, but it is not sacred. So if so, teach also that they are not liable to receive kares for entering there if they're tameh. And the Gemara asks, and for eating an offering
priests eating of the most sacred, do we not require that this take place before the entrance of the temple courtyard? But isn't it taught in the Baraisa, the Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, says, there are 2 wickets in the chamber of knives, and their height was 8 cubits, and the function of these openings was in order to render the entire temple courtyard for the eating of offerings of the most sacred order, and to render fit all of the temple courtyard for the slaughter of offerings of lesser sanctity. And that would imply, and that therefore anywhere where those 2 things are happening, if you went there while tameh, you would be liable to karas. So Ravina said, remove from here the clause concerning eating. The eating of offerings does not have to take place before the entrance of the temple courtyard. And the Gemara says, what do you mean? Isn't it written with regard to the offerings brought at the inauguration of the tabernacle? And Moses said to Aaron and his sons, cook the meat at the entrance of the tent of meeting and eat it there. This indicates that the eating of offerings had to be at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And what's the Gemara going to say? When was that, right? The inauguration of the Mishkan in the wilderness? How often did that happen? Once in all of human history. And since they were specifically commanded for just that time, one cannot derive from there any laws with regard to offerings in general. That's where we'll stop. We'll pick it up tomorrow, regular Friday time, noon Pacific. I'm seeing no comments or questions, so look forward to learning with you tomorrow. All the best. And an early good Shabbos.